Everyone, this is Ross Ben with Mystic Mike. Here it is, long awaited, 11.11. We're gonna do some more balling in America. And just to address the elephant in the room, I know it's been about 6 or 7 weeks since our last episode, but the reality is, I think I bawled myself out. I think Mike did as well, because reality is ball is a dark topic, and we didn't even really get into the fullness. We kind of just dealt with ball on a historical level. We made light of it, but balling ain't easy. This ball game ain't easy, and I know it took me a minute to recharge my batteries and get grounded and fully in the present afterwards. What was your thoughts and experiences, Mike?
Well, well, first off, it's good to see you, my friend. So the elephant in the room, and I'm going to take responsibility for that, because where we left off, it was my turn to come back, and this has happened actually a few times in our interactions. I noticed this the first time, which I came out to the Wissahickon and we did the tour. We went to the I Am Temple, and then we went to Kelpius Cave. And at the time, it just seems like a normal thing. Oh, wow, this is cool. This is interesting, connection, all that sort of stuff. And then a day or two later, just internally, how I experienced it internally was, my energy was lower. My motivation to do anything was lower. My drive was to go inside, to be still, to contemplate. And so that's not a conscious thing. It's not like, oh, well, on my list of things to do today, I'll contemplate and stay inside. It was no, it's when you are moved from within, you do whatever within takes you to. So that lasted. I remember that. And Jesse came, and me and Jesse talked about that. And then a series of just events in life. It seemed to kind of be there was a correcting, if you will. And correction isn't always, the most comfortable thing. So let's fast forward to 6 or 7 weeks ago. So we go and we have our conversation. And it was a deep conversation. I was only there for half of it, right? And so I listened to the other half in my headphones, whenever you release that the next day or so. And then the exact same thing, I was kind of hit with it. I was it wasn't so much the specific information as much as it was the act of we're going deep into a dark sort of stuff, maybe an uncomfortable blind spot in this narrative. And so when that happens, when you go deep, this is the inside stuff. So long and short of it, I really needed some space from a lot of work. I think shortly after that, I stopped taking on one-on-one sessions. It wasn't a cause and effect, oh no, Ross said some stuff and now I'm no longer going to talk to folks. That's just what naturally unfolded. And so my life has gone through nothing major, but there've been some changes and adjustments. And I can't help but think that the impetus of just these conversations, of this consciousness, and that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, is consciousness, and how consciousness literally creates our reality. What's my reality? I didn't feel like doing nothing. That's reality. That's experience. And so now we're coming full circle. I'm really, we talked a little bit about this off camera. I've got some stuff I want to cover, and I'm wow, this is going to be new for me because I'm rushing my process a bit, but I'm also kind of feel by releasing my normal timeline of creating a presentation, sitting with it and delivering it, I'm doing it in a different way today. And so that has me a little anxious, wow, am I going to be able to tie all these ideas together? But then I'm also feel a little bit lighter because, the process at least my process of creating a presentation, starting in this space, the mind space, and then going into like the actual, like, let me create some visuals, and then how am I going to tell that story? You know, that's work. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, or at least my perspective on ball and balling, has to do with work and the normalization of work. Like, you know, I got to work. And so there's a lightness that happens when we don't have to do work. That doesn't mean we don't do nothing. It just means, like, you know, it's perspective. And so part of like this whole experience for me in this presentation, which will be following, is like, you know, a real, like, you know, live wire act of someone kind of like consciously stepping in to like, let me release some of these ideas that have been born into, that have become second nature to me. Not my first nature, but my second nature. It felt like a second skin. That doesn't mean it's my skin. It's just like I thought it was. So I am, I'm excited to be back and have this conversation. I've moved through that process. And in fact, the timing is perfect. The last part of this presentation will be about a trip I just took last weekend, which also seems to be, since that's going to be the final piece of my presentation today, this trip which I took, it also tells me that the timing of this presentation could have only occurred once this, you know, this isn't planning. This isn't like, this is life unfolding. So
unfolding. You know, this thing is unfolding.
It's unfolding. It's unfolding.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was a long answer to your short question, but you know, that's where I am.
Well, give thanks. So I think how we're going to do it right today, the ball is in Mike's hands. It's in Mike's court. And I'm going to do what you did. I'm gonna turn my camera off, but I'm going to leave my mic on.
All right. I'd appreciate that.
And if every now and then you say something like that sparks something, I hope I can, you know, jump in real quick and just build with you right in that moment.
Please do. Please do. That door is open. This is a two-way conversation. Before we get started, I'm going to go and I want to show you something. So, Roz and I, Roz invited me to sit in a booth with him at a festival about 2 weekends ago or 3 weekends ago. And it was, you know, on another topic, that was like this great experience, and I'm loving it.
It was the Pennsylvania Fall Cannabis Festival in Kutztown, Pennsylvania,
in the middle of nowhere, and that place was packed. There was a lot of people. And what tickled me about the whole thing, was like, there were 200 plus vendors there, and 99.9% of their goods and their wares was like directly cannabis related, whether that's like glassware, whether that's like, you know, product, or whether something within like a genre. But then like in the middle of all of that was our booth, and like you've got your crystals and all of that around, and in the middle of that was like these works, these books, which both you and I have created, and some of the artwork. And, you know, the long and the short of it is like the level of approach which we bring to like history and maybe conspiracy and all this sort of stuff. Like it's not entry level. It's not entry level. Like this is deep stuff. Like if you're watching this show, you are in a very, very small percentage of people who are open to ideas and perspectives. Like a lot of people can't handle that. So all that being said, like in this event, which is attracting a certain vibe and a certain attitude, like buried in the middle of it was this like deep sort of information, and seeing the people who it resonated with, because there's only a small percent, that just made me so happy, because I'm watching people walk by just kind of zoned out, like in whatever world they're in. And you could see that spark, because I don't think anyone came for me, and a couple of people did come for you. I did talk to some folks who are like, is Roz here? Can I speak to Roz? But for the most part, when I could see that spark, and I could see that something which we're talking about or wrote about, like hit someone, like they were able to jump through all these hoops to come to Kutztown, to go through all of this and find it. Like, to me, that is so much fun. So that was great. but that's not what I'm going to show you. So there was I walked around. I always like to look at like the vendors and see if like there's anything that speaks to me. And for the most part, like, nah, whatever. Like, I'm a minimalist. I want only what I need, only something which is going to speak to me deeply. And there was a guy there, and he was selling a lot of Peruvian goods. So he spends half of his time down in Peru on like a camp-like setting, for lack of a better word, with his spiritual family. And then he comes back to the United States afterwards. And I was like, all right, there's something about that story that spoke to me, about the guy who spoke to me, and where in Peru where he was. So anyway, long and short of it, do you remember? I think I showed it to you. The little souvenir I got. It was like a handmade round textile. Do you remember that? It's like a patch. Yeah. So long story short, long story long. So I take that patch because I'm a crafty guy. I like to work with my hands. I like to create. And I really like this idea of working with people anonymously. Like, I kind of know who the person is who made the piece, which I had, because I asked the person, I'm like, who made this? Tell me about her, and show me a picture. And so there was a connection. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know what happened, with this thing she made. And once it leaves her hands. So I take that, and now I start working with it. I start weaving in with this other person's work. And so it becomes this connection. And so that's another thing in which, to me, which not just you and I are doing, but all of the participants, whether it is someone who's just listening or watching, or whether someone who also has contact with us, like, we're building these connections. And so what I did was a symbolic but literal, like, reconnection with some of this other woman's energy. And so I'm kind of proud of it. So I want to show it to you. So this is what I came up with. So if you remember, there was that circle, and then I attached it into this fabric here, and I did some weaving around it. And in fact, I use this to then put my crystals when I spread them out in before meditation or something like that. This is what I use this for. And so that's that. One last thing. So the materials which I used were all very important materials. I don't know if you know this, but I lived in a church for 60 days last year. And this material here, that green, I brought that from the church. I was supposed to clean out the church. And so, like, that energy is in there. And then this, like, this canvas, that's the same canvas I use for making this sign. So all of this sort of stuff. So I love these connections, any way which we're able to do it, to build either direct or indirect, symbolic, literal connections in a, with, I seem to have locked up. Let me see. Did I lock up on you?
Yeah, you have.
All right. So let me stop the video. Let me start. Am I back? All right. So that's a big part of it. And I want to share that to also set the stage. So real quick. So what'd you think? You like it?
Love it. Yeah. And speaking of connections, we should thank Sister Tamu of Mend Arts up in Kutztown. She was a gracious hostess, as well as Ras Naim and Infinite Treasures. These are the ones who, they opened that portal for us to be up there. They wanted the mystics of the 40th parallel to be present. And we thankful. That was I think you described it best. You talk about a bazaar, and as far as a marketplace, being a place where you can encounter the bazaar. There was a lot of different things out there, man. It was a very interesting marketplace. I was thankful to have experienced that. And I would have, like you say, it was in the middle of nowhere. I would have never anticipated the energy and the vibes, the people that were out there. But I also did observe that, it's very close to Allentown. That place is kind of triangulating New York and Philly, and I guess Pittsburgh to a degree. But I say that because I did observe a lot of New Yorkers in at both the sellers and by just ones walking around. So it was an interesting experience. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm all about the ball mission.
Yeah. And I gotta express my gratitude also. I expressed it to you, but then also the originators who opened the portal. It was a great time. I did not get to meet Ras Naeem. Is it that's his name, correct?
Yes.
Yes, but I look forward to making that connection, particularly if he is watching this. I'm looking forward to when we get to meet face to face. So I'm very excited for that. And one other thing about the location, what really jumped out, that part of Pennsylvania is right by what's called Indiantown Gap. Do you know what that is?
You had started telling me about it.
It's just a place in like the Appalachian, in the ridge of the Appalachian Mountains where it opens up. It was a place where people would be able to like go from across that line without having to go up and over the mountains. And so it was just naturally like, a meeting place. And now I think it's where the Pennsylvania National Guard is headquartered. And that's basically what Indiantown Gap is. But at one point it was just known as Indiantown, which kind of tells you like, about its significance, but even more so is like, it's a portal. In the most literal sense, it's a passageway for the land that is on that side of the ridge, and then the land on the other side. And on the other side is where we start getting into, that's where the anthracite is and all this other stuff. So we can look at it geologically to ascertain like the energetics of it. Like it was a portal, and it's a protected portal. How do you know it's protected? Because ain't nobody's living there.
Right. Right.
All right. Are we ready to go?
Ready, bro.
All right. So let me see. All right. Screen share, share sound. Here we go. All right. So this is going to be a 3-part presentation, and the nuts and the bolts of it, or the real meaning that I'm trying to pass on. There's going to be lots of like data points, but it's mostly about consciousness and reality and how they are so interconnected, and how ball consciousness is in the backdrop of all of our experiences because of what we've been born into, and to become more aware of seeing it, both in terms of our own lives, but then also seeing how false realities can and are created. I made a little bit of commentary in the very beginning about like work and ball consciousness and certain attitudes becoming second nature meaning something that becomes so close to our experience of understanding reality that we don't realize it's a second nature. The term second nature implies there's a first nature, and our first nature comes before that. And this is just natural of being human beings, and which is we become what we are born into. Whatever is the culture, the household, the language, the viewpoints, whether it's a harmonious thing or not harmonious, we become that, we mold around it. And so that becomes in many ways our second nature. And so what we're going to see here is I'm going to talk about concepts, first beginning with just like ideas of reality and consciousness, just so that everyone's on the same page of my use of those words. That's not to say like this is the definition. I'm saying this is Mike's definition in terms of how I'm giving this presentation. And then I'm going to go into some specific examples of ball consciousness in the false reality. I'm going to talk specifically about baseball. I always like to go back to that. And I'm going to look at it, particularly if people are familiar with some of my takes on baseball. There's going to be some new stuff, which I'm going to cover today. And then lastly, the last part, I'm going to talk about a trip, which I just took down to Williamsburg, Virginia and Jamestown, Virginia. And I'm going to try to tie it all together. So that's the overview, and let's just jump right in. Part one is about reality, creating false realities, and ball consciousness. So I'm going to begin with this very simple model of understanding consciousness. So there are a couple parts, and we all have this. This applies to all of us. So we have an inner world, and then there's an outer world. If it exists within you, if it begins within you, that's part of the inner world, and the outer world is all of everything that's not beginning within you, if you will. And then there is a connection, between our inner worlds and the outer worlds, and that creates a feedback loop. And this feedback loop is, this is your reality. This is your actual consciousness, your conscious reality of what you experience. And this feedback loop goes both ways. There's, the inner world can affect the outer world affects the inner world. It goes back and forth. There are many ways in which this happens. It's part of the mystery of the human experience. And so the feedback loop is, I'll move on to the next slide. So the inner world, we could also define this as consciousness itself. And so this is, we're looking at this dynamic between the inner world and the outer world, this feedback loop where they play off one another, where there's almost like, it goes back and forth who's leading this dance, if you will. But the two main parts, particularly what we have control of, is what we pay our attention to in the outer world. And so there are infinite things which we can place our attention to. And then the feedback loop comes back and it goes to our inner world. And then whatever it is we put our awareness to, whatever it is we're looking at, whether literally or symbolically, we will then label it or define it from our inner world. And then this creates meaning, and this creates our reality. So let's go a little bit deeper with just when I say the outer world. So the outer world, and these are just I'm giving a model. I'm giving definition to something that does not have definition. I'm not saying this is the only way. I'm just saying this is a way of understanding the understandable. So the outer world, in the most general sense, to me, I break it up in three ways. We've got the baseline reality, and that's the natural world. It's nature. It's all of the things that are material and physical, which we experience life with. And then, but it's that before it's named. Because as soon as we start naming things, then we create this other thing. And this is part of the human experience. These are false realities. The false reality exists within the baseline reality. Every human being, human experience, when you start having stories, when you start having meaning, all this sort of stuff, it's a false reality. I'm going to define that in a moment. But then these two things, they exist in what I call the greater reality. And the greater reality is the mystery of life, all of those things which are outside of the material world, but are real, which we can kind of understand. That greater reality term, for me, encapsulates it all. So we're always connected, each of us is individual, and we're always connected to a variety of all of these things. We're always paying attention to things in false reality, the natural world, greater reality, and that's going to be unique to each person. And then it comes back and we define it. We define it both what we've been educated on, how we've been indoctrinated, how our general preferences, our likes and our dislikes, our experience, all of the things that make us individuals, all of these different sort of lenses. What we pay attention to in the outer world then comes back and we provide meaning to what it is. This is why two people can look at the exact same thing, have the exact same experience in the outer world, but then their feeling world, their emotional world, their experiential world to that can be completely different because their inner world is different. It is regulated to a different thing. We're all individuals, and that's going to be unique to each of us. So before I get deeper into the inner world, I just want to say this about when I define a false reality. This is how we know what a false reality is. And false reality doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means it's a false reality. A false reality is any reality that if it is not being fed, it will die. If you are not feeding it, it will die. Or if someone else is not feeding it. So for example, like the financial system, like if all of a sudden everyone stopped like participating in this financial system, it would die. You know, it's a false reality. Like it's real on a certain level, but it's also false. Like government, if everyone stops voting, that would go away. Something else would come. Languages, if you stop speaking a language, that language dies. These are false realities. And so some false realities are in greater harmony with the natural world, with baseline reality, and some are not, but nonetheless, they're false realities. And so let me also give this one point, which is like, let's go look at the sun rising. Whether you believe in the sun rising or not believing in the sun rising, it's going to rise. The false reality is what we tell ourselves what the sun is and why it's rising. But what is natural, what is not the false reality is, seeing it go up. That is something regardless of belief. So that's just an example of like kind of like this differentiation between false realities. So I'm talking about all of this because I want to go into what I call ball consciousness. And so ball consciousness is a way which is within our inner world, a lens within our inner world, which we have been born into. We have become that way of perceiving reality. In the same way, if you're born into a household where they speak English, like you just become it, it becomes second nature. And what you did so beautifully, Roz, in my opinion, in our last episode, was you demonstrated two things, or there are two things that jumped out at me. One was this storyline which we find ourselves living within, which exists much, much longer, goes back much, much further than maybe what we know. And then also showing how all of these different storylines of history, which at least for myself had seemed to be disconnected, that they were connected in a certain way. And particularly, coming back to the establishment of this new world, the establishment of the colonies, which brought us to where we are today within what we call North America. So seeing that was really, really significant to see that. And then also to recognize that we've been told a lot of stories, which may be factual or actual descriptions of describing, certain events within history, but then also realizing, but there's more to it. Like that's just a snapshot. It's just a snapshot. And so what that does is it breaks things down. So where I'm going to go with this is talking about specifically what I'm calling ball consciousness. And ball consciousness being a way in which we as individuals who've been born into it, and this is going to be unique to all of us, but I'm going to say if you're alive in this modern culture, and you got an internet, and you got the headphones to listen to things, and you're paying bills, and you got to worry about all the stuff to just survive, you're part of it. I'm part of it. Right. There's not like a shame with that. There's a recognition. So I want to break this down as this is a lens within all of our inner worlds. And so what we see, what we expect to see is what we do see. This is part of this inner world, outer world feedback loop. Your inner world, all of our inner worlds are focused in a certain unique way of what matters to you, what you look for in reality. This is all done unconsciously. And then we go and we see it out of the infinite things to look for. And then we come back with it and we have meaning. And so another way of describing this inner world is it's made of different lenses. And one of the most basic lenses, I'm going to say, is this ball consciousness, because we have been born into this system of approach for a very, very long time. So it seems normal. It seems appropriate because we expect to see it. We see it. And this is what creates these feedback loops and perpetrates false realities. There are different ways of false realities. There are false reality programs which go on indefinitely, just like taking care of itself. You're born into it, and the people just go and propagate it by teaching their children what they've learned. But then there are also false reality projects. And these are very, very like short-lived operations with a beginning point and an end point, which fit within a program. And I'm going to say right now, we're seeing collectively, this is a project. We're going through something with an end point, which they're trying to continue a particular way of being, of consciousness. And so now the same institutions, whatever you want to call the way which manages the fact that we're always in this ball type of world. And as we saw, ball reaches all different cultures. As we become more clear, particularly right now, because we're seeing a shift, like right before our eyes, we're seeing a trick being played. This is how you're creating a part of the false reality. We're seeing that, and by recognizing all of the different parts within ourselves, to know oneself, this is part of what that means, to understand what your unique way of seeing the world, and then deciding whether or not you continue with this. That is what this is about. So ball consciousness. I think the best way to really understand it is to compare it to something else. And something which I learned listening to you, and particularly as we've been talking about ball, is this idea of Edenic, of Eden-like. So we have ball, and these are words to understand concepts of approach. So we have a ball consciousness and an Edenic consciousness. We have ball cultures and we have Edenic cultures, I suppose, all of these different things. So I want to compare the two so we can begin to understand it. So I like to think from the top line comparison between these two is that of an apex predator, of seeing reality and approaching reality in such a way that there is an apex predator versus, and that would be the ball consciousness, versus this apex nurture. That would be the opposite of it. So within a ball consciousness, and we see this. So it's there could be ball worshiping. And that's a very, very, like, I understand what I'm doing and I'm participating in this with, like, my full capabilities and my conscious alignment. And then there's like a consciousness, which is something which you've just learned. So within ball consciousness, there's this just kind of understanding that there is this, at the peak of our reality, of our world, of our culture, there's this apex predator. And if we don't keep this apex predator happy, and if we're not working for this apex predator, well, then we're not going to get our stuff. There's going to be a negative payback. I'm not taken care of. And if I am in harmony, if I bow down and kiss the ring of this apex predator, this is a concept, then right, I am taken care of because this is their game. Now, if you start to think,
that's like Darwinism.
That's exactly it.
And it's like Darwinism is like what you're saying, like this apex predator ball consciousness manifests culturally, societally here in the West, because that's the basic paradigm that defines human nature and what's expected.
Yes. This is your nature.
How you behave.
Exactly. Yes. And so think about that as it relates to a project. So that would be a project versus a program. A program is an ongoing, for eternity approach. And so at some point in time in the 1800s, Darwin started putting out this idea of the biological evolution and survival of the fittest and all of this sort of stuff. Prior to that, that was not like necessarily a universally accepted idea of how reality works. So there was a project in which this had to be sold into the consciousness of folks. And there was like just the same thing with dinosaurs. There was once a time like no one believed in dinosaurs. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, actually there were enormous lizards. They were, gigantic, and they lived all over the place. And a lot of folks, whether that's an actual description or not, it's not the conversation I want to have right now. I'm just talking about consciousness. This was originally met by some people as like, that ain't true. That's not true. That's not what I know. And then the project goes to condition the brain through indoctrination and through all of these different techniques.
Shit. Right.
And then at some point that takes foot. And then you got to stop doing that. Then all of that work is done. That project comes to an end, and then it becomes self-propagating. It's, oh yeah, survival of the fittest, survival of the fittest. And that's where it fits into the program. We're seeing that happening right now with something which we're dealing with, like health issues. We're seeing a project until what they're hoping is it takes root, that people accept that this is the way things are. And then, you don't have to constantly sell it. So yes, right. So we've got this apex predator. The opposite of that is this apex nurturer. At the very top of the pyramid, if you will, and I'm being kind of like air quotes, is like, no, there's something that takes care of you. There's something that's going to take care of you. You are part of something which is so great that you do not need to. This is what you said so frequently in your presentation, was enterprise. It's all about work. How are you going to do your work? And think about this. That is such an American value. And that word is so it's tricky, because I talked about making this craft, and I said, I get to work, and I use work to describe something which I don't consider that work at all. Or it has a different connotation of like, I got to go to my 9 to 5. It ain't that. So like there's subtleties. There's something which we are to do, I suppose, but there's a difference. One is for survival, and one is because this is my natural expression as who I am. Because whether I get paid or not get paid, this is what I do. And so again, this is part of like understanding who one is because they recognize that. So we begin with this idea of what we're calling ball consciousness, of this survival of the fittest, of this, like, you got to work, you got to pay your tribute to your boss, to your captain, who's still paying. Like, it's mob mentality. It is all of these hierarchies, it's very much like the churches, any of these hierarchical churches, we see that. So I want to go down a couple different ways of looking at the difference between these Edenic consciousness and ball consciousness. And this is what I think. We're born into it, and some of us embrace, like, they really, really, really align with this idea of ball consciousness. Like, it makes sense to them. And then there's some people, like, it's harder for them to, like, okay, this is something which
they reject the program.
Or exactly, it requires more effort. And so this, what I'm going to go and share, like what I'm going to encourage a person, if they're listening to this, is kind of check how they respond to it, not as like, this is right or wrong, but recognizing we're on a continuum, because some of the stuff of ball consciousness, like Mike as a person likes, I'm like, I kind of dig that, but then also beginning to recognize like the subtleties. So this is just all bringing awareness. So ball consciousness is very much about this idea of scarcity and limitation. There are limited resources. There's limitations to your life. There's limitations to all of this sort of stuff. Which is very opposite to abundance. As you were writing, or as you were reading the words that were written about what the new world, the quote unquote new world smelled like by these people who are seeing it, they're like, there is just so much of everything. It permeates everything we need to do. Scarcity is like, there's like, it is biological within the male that he knows that he needs to fight and find a woman in order to ensure his procreation and his lineage and his seed is passed on. That's a friggin' idea. That's an idea, but that's like saying there's a limitation of like, women resources, or like, I want to get the championship. There's only one champion. That's a limited resource. Oh, I'm living in a city. I want to go and get a parking spot, but there's so many people parked on my block. Am I going to get a spot? Like, these are all like limitations, and we can see from how our system, which we're born into, which we kind of like, and we've been encouraged and valued and rewarded for participating in, like, it becomes our second nature. So when we think of ball consciousness, all things with scarcity, is fits into it. Enterprise and work, we got to go and get to work. There's something we got to accomplish. Like, it's not good enough as it is. I've got to go and improve upon it. That's part of it. I got to get to work. How many people would do their work if they weren't being bribed with a paycheck? That's a real question. What would I do if they weren't bribing me? And then ask yourself, well, what would I still be doing if I wasn't being bribed? Those sort of questions, like, not necessarily in terms of figuring out the right answer as much as it is to figuring out where your boundaries internally lie. Like, okay, this matters, this doesn't matter to me. And you understand
purpose.
I would say that comes out. I would say that that definitely comes out. But the comparison, which I did to enterprise and work, is the significance of rest and reception. We are so anti-rest in our culture, right? Like, I mean, think about like this idea. We know it is a baseline reality truth that the material world fixes itself when it rests. Rest is so significant. Like, that's when the magic work happens. The stuff in the greater reality that you can't really explain. Like, I don't know why, like, I'm not consciously digesting my food. I'm not consciously regulating my temperature, but that's happening, particularly when I'm slow. So, like, this idea of work and always having to be hustling, that's part of a mentality. Now, there's something fun about hustling. There's something fun about work too. There's something very satisfying. So this is where it gets confusing, and we begin to recognize what we've been born into and what's been normalized. This one's a real tricky one for me. This idea of competition versus cooperation and harmony. Like, competition in the most basic level is the fight for scarcity. Whatever it is you're scarce, what you're fighting for, the competition is to get it. Those were the examples. Like, I am competing. And there's, there is a truth to the fact that competition does sharpen one's sword. If I'm going to run faster, like, if you were to go and say, how fast can you run, Mike, in this 40-yard dash, and you got like a stopwatch, and I run as fast as I can, like 3 times, you get my time. Chances are, once I rest and recuperate, if I was racing against someone who might be like a step faster than me, like not like much faster, but just a little bit faster, I'd run faster. That's what competition does. It can push you to places you haven't been. Like, there's that. And competition can be kind of fun. Like, I'm notorious for board games. I love to play board games. I get real serious on them. Like, I recognize that I don't have to win, but I love the experience. And so that is in their competition is this where it gets tricky. So we see that, but then let's go back to sports for a while. I'm going to make this argument right now. If you look at we are in we place our prized athletes on a pedestal in our culture. It doesn't matter what the sport is, what country it is, like whatever the top one is, like they are put up on a pedestal for pure athletic prowess. And there's something beautiful and fun and all that sort of stuff. Like, I like to watch, I do like to watch really, really, like, people who are beautiful in their body, who can move and do all this. Like, I get that. But if you go to the realm of professional sports, the elitist level of professional athleticism, and usually within any sport, there tends to be someone, maybe once in a generation, who is head and shoulders above everyone else. Like all of his other competition, like this guy is just like, whoa. For the most part, there are exceptions to this rule. For the most part, if you go and you look at that person, because that person is typically like they get a lot of good publicity, and they are sold to us as wonderful human beings, they tend to be really shitty people. You know, if you go and you like, and I'm not going to go and name any names, but if you go and you read some of these biographies, or like these anecdotal stories of what some of these like amazing competitors are like outside of their life, this need to win, because that's part of being an amazing competitor in our professional sports world. This need to win, and to win is it's so valued, but you carry that, often that is carried throughout the rest of their lives, and they're just horrible. They're like not good people to be around, and they've been rewarded for that. Like that is kind of like the to an extreme, like the human aspect where competition is immensely destructive. Like, where the irony of these very, very selfish human, I'm competing with everything attitude, and applying that to all of their relations, with other human beings, with the environment in general, like just like that is a viewpoint. And then I want to compare that to this idea of cooperation, of like working together, of being in harmony, whether that's being in harmony with your environment. And that's when you got to question your environment. But nonetheless, like, if, you could be in harmony with our ball environment. That is true. You'll be rewarded by it. But then maybe being in harmony with the baseline reality. And that comes, and the word cooperation goes a lot with humans, like how we can work together. We live in a strange sort of place where our culture is immensely competitive. We're competitive with with everyone else, for whatever it is we're competing for, the most amount of likes, or the championship, whatever. We're competing, but we also got to work together. And so I look at it that we got a 80-20, 80% competitive outlook within our civilization, 20% cooperative. What's that 20%? The fact that we're not rioting and killing each other, like, immediately. And I would say at least if we're living within groups of people, like it should be flipped the other way, 80% cooperation. But that cooperative attitude, that is this Edenic, this all things are provided for you. It is both, let's say, experiential, but I say it begins particularly now with an attitude, with an inner lens, with an inner world of seeing the reality, because what you see what you expect to see. And when all we see is competition, when all we see is that, well, then we're going to go and experience that. And so this is beginning to recognize, and how this ball consciousness is, which we're born into, creates this filter in which we see reality, and then we go out and we see the outer world, and then it becomes real. A year ago, there was a new therapy, a new medication that was introduced, and they introduced it with the scarcity model, saying like, hey, there's only limited ones of this special sauce, and people were like, oh, I got to get it. Like that's the meeting. That's a false reality. There was plenty. There was a false reality of this happens all the time, of a purposeful withholding of supply. And then it meets the inner world of like a competitive viewpoint. And then when they meet, like it's a very predictable reality. That's how these false realities and ball consciousness in the most mundane, everyday level becomes actual reality. So the last point I want to say is, another way which we can look at it, like the very idea of cities or hierarchical living, like very, very strict and well-defined caste systems, that is part of this like scarcity model. There are only so many people at the top, and there's like too many people living in too small of a space. So all resources are artificially, though it is true, are fought for. Like, that is ball consciousness. And the Edenic would be, and I say this maybe with quotation marks, like nomadic. Like we have stories in our mind of what nomadic people look like. And like when I say not look like what that experience looks like, Stone Age maybe, or hunter-gatherer, or prehistory. And so we've been painted that picture. But that's not, I'm not limiting nomadic to that. Nomadic means that you are in flow with life and less about grounded or rooted within a system. So that was like the last that's the last point I want to go into this viewpoint, or this understanding of ball consciousness, or more so a consciousness, which I'm calling ball. Like we could call it a lot of other words which fit it, but in light of your presentation and what we're talking about here, like it makes the most amount of sense to me right now to title it ball consciousness. So before I get into the next step, I want to pause and see if you have any like questions or comments or anything which you want to add to that, or need any more clarification. If you're speaking, you're mute. It's possible you've stepped away. So I'm going to assume, Roz, you stepped away for a moment, and now we're going to go and I'm going to go back into the presentation. So, okay. So where are we? So the next part is baseball. And what I want to do right now is I talked about sports, and we live in a sports culture. And if you look at most civilizations, sports are very, very significant. You know, whether you want to go and look at like the Iron Curtain or the communist regime, and you look at what the Soviets were like, you know, how important the Olympics were to the Soviet Empire and like the whole Cold War sort of thing, or you want to go and look at the ball games in Mesoamerica, or you want to go and look at the original Olympics back in ancient Greece. Like sporting has always been very important. I'm going to focus on baseball, and baseball is particularly of significance within our culture of the United States, because baseball is our national pastime. So when something is past time, it is not limited by time, which makes it eternal. So there's some kind of like code words within baseball. And this has been well covered by a lot of folks about like the depths of baseball and the meaning of baseball. I'm not going to really go down that line, but I want to indicate that I'm aware, and I think that there's a lot to be said if you're interested in baseball, to begin looking at it as a something much deeper than just simply a ball game. And the reason why I also like to talk about baseball is because I talk about the Susquehanna River a lot. That's a very significant part of my experience and my reality. And the Baseball Hall of Fame is located at a very important location in the Susquehanna, right where it begins. And so because of that, if you're familiar with like some of my other baseball work, like I go really deep in a lot of different ways and talk about baseball. But I want to begin by talking about Abner Doubleday. So, and the Doubleday myth. And so the Doubleday myth refers to the belief that the sport of baseball was invented in 1839 by future American Civil War general Abner Doubleday in Cooperstown, New York. Cooperstown is at the headwaters of the Susquehanna. The claim initially received a favorable reception from Americans, but eventually garnered criticism from various writers. So this is a false reality. It's pretty much understood like that in baseball, for baseball historians, that Abner Doubleday did not invent baseball, and he did not invent baseball at Cooperstown, but that story took root, and then it's become a life of its own. This false reality, this made up story has become an actual reality, though it's built upon, you know, a total myth. So the question is, so who was Doubleday? Who was Doubleday? So Doubleday, who he was a career United States Army officer and Union Major General in the American Civil War. He fired the first shot of defense at Fort Sumter, the opening battle of the war. So Wikipedia is telling you right now that this guy fired the first shot of the Civil War. Right? You know, think about that symbolically. Think about George Washington throwing his silver dollar across the Potomac. Think about the mythologies which are told to us about certain characters. And we know about the, how important the Civil War is, like in terms of framing up our understanding of American history. And Abner Doubleday played a pivotal role in the early fighting of the Battle of Gettysburg. So this statement's a little bit of an understatement of how the story works. Abner Doubleday is thought of to be the hero of Gettysburg. He was a Union general, or I don't think he was a general at the time, but he was put in charge. His commander was killed like on the first day, and they were like the Union was outmanned, and he was able to hold off the Confederate forces until the Union backup came, and then the Union won, and the tide of the Civil War changed. Abner Doubleday is said to be that guy. He's the guy who made this happen. So this is part of the Abner Doubleday story. So we're going to go and look. So the question is, who was Doubleday? So I'm calling Doubleday, he was a literal conductor of death. So we're going to look at the Battle of Gettysburg. So the Battle of Gettysburg took place over July 1st through 3rd. It was a 3-day event. It took place in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. If you look right here at the location at 39.81 degrees, that is very, very close to being spot on the 39th parallel. That's probably, I don't know, less than a mile from it. But anyway, so the Battle of Gettysburg is a big deal in American history, within American lore, within American, within the stories which we tell ourselves and we're told. And in this 3-day battle, the two armies suffered between 46,000 and 51,000 casualties. So let's say 50,000 people died there. So we have Abner Doubleday was a general at this 3-day occurrence. I'm not saying he wasn't part of other battles, but this is a really, really significant one. And if you stop and you think about this, and you think about like human experience, and just, maybe even using your own as a point of reference, like how many people have you seen die? Like with your own eyes, die in front of you? Most people probably have not seen that, or it's going to be a small percentage or a percentage of people. And then of those who've actually seen people die, how many have seen like a violent traumatic death? There are different types of death. You could be around, surrounding like a loved one as they transition over. Like that's a very different sort of experience. But a traumatic death, and that's an even smaller population. There are people who've seen that, but imagine now seeing in a 3-day period, being in the center, the conductor of 50,000 deaths. Like that doesn't mean you see it all, but you are surrounded in that energy. Like obviously everyone who is involved with that or any major battle has been in that. If you've been in any sort of battle, like, that puts you in a small group of people, like a smaller group of the total human family. Not everyone has that experience. And this right here is this is like the elite of that, of this 50,000 deaths. And to give you a point of reference, like, D-Day, the storming of Normandy, of the beginning of like, the arrival of British and American forces on the continental Europe in World War II, where we see all of the footage of the bodies just being mowed down. They open up like the back of the boats and they're just getting mowed down. Like there were 10,000 casualties that day. That was a 1-day occurrence. And so compare that to the 50,000. Like this is a big number. This isn't a competition to say like, well, this was more, this is less. This is me pointing out a very specific, like literal fact. Abner Doubleday is a conductor of death. He was the general there. He's had these experiences. That is part of what and whom he is. So we have to take that in reference into understanding who this mythological inventor of baseball is. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper with Doubleday. So Doubleday was also a leading occultist, named by another occultist as the inventor of baseball. So when I'm saying occultist right now, I'm saying someone who is consciously working within the invisible realm, and within the time period in which Abner Doubleday lived, spiritualism and very conscious interaction with the dead, whether that being fictitious, like, scam artists, or actually being able to connect with the dead, irregardless. Like these were experiences which were commonplace in the occultic circles back then, and Doubleday was part of it. So now we see that this guy is very much like, a necromancer, no matter how you want to go and describe it. But I want to go and walk through this line. I want to give the receipts. So we see here, we're like, all right, well, where does this Doubleday myth begin? So in 1908, 15 years after his death, Doubleday was declared by the Mills Commission to have invented the game of baseball. The claim has been thoroughly debunked by historians. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's because of that myth, Cooperstown, that myth saying that Doubleday invented it at Cooperstown, all false realities. Then the Baseball Hall of Fame was built there. And then now everyone knows that's not true, but it doesn't matter. Baseball is now linked to the river, even if it was done on a farce. This is part of false realities, So, okay, so we see that. So we're going to go a little bit deeper with that. In 1888, good year, a lot of things happen in these years that have three numbers. And if you look at it, the history they tell us, but in 1888, Spalding, and so Spalding, this is the same Spalding of Spalding Sporting Goods. He was an owner of the Chicago Cubs. Spalding accompanied a group of star players on a world tour to promote baseball, playing an exhibition game in the shadow of the Great Pyramids of Egypt. He actually went all over the world, but they're pulling out the Great Pyramids of Egypt. So that's, I would think about that. And then afterwards, upon their return the following year, a dinner was held to honor the players, and Mills. So Mills was another owner of another baseball team, professional baseball team, was asked to serve of the master of ceremonies. The dinner was held at Delmonico's restaurant in New York, and it was attended by an eclectic and prestigious crowd of 300 guests, including Mark Twain and Theodore Roosevelt. And so during this event, there was some talk as like where baseball was invented, and Spalding and this guy Chadwick was saying it was based upon a game called Rounders, which is similar to baseball in England. And Spalding is like, no, this is an American game. Interesting side note, Rounders is a term as it relates to like a professional poker player, and usually like not necessarily a scam artist, but someone who like grinds out a living, taking money from like regular card players. So there's like an element of a little bit of like a distrustness with it. So I'm just saying like that is built into the language here. But nonetheless, because of that argument that happened after this dinner at Delmonico's, where Spalding, in response, Spalding, who believed baseball was fundamentally American invention, published an article disputing Chadwick's claim. Chadwick was the guy who said it was Rounders, and challenged him by suggesting that they appoint a commission to settle the matter. And Chadwick agreed. And in 1905, a commission headed by Mills was formed. So this is the backstory. This is the false reality. There was this argument. Where's baseball coming from? Oh, we're going to solve it. We're going to create this Mills Commission. And then the Mills Commission goes and they say like Abner Doubleday was the inventor of baseball. And this was all a Spalding. This was all about Albert Spalding. It's just given the name of Mills. This happens all the time in creating these false realities, is you give the credit, because it's not about them for the credit. It's about like pushing forward a certain narrative. So this is really a Spalding enterprise. So then the question is, who is Spalding? Spalding had been a prominent member of the Theosophical Society. In 1900, Spalding moved to San Diego with his newly acquired second wife, Elizabeth, and he was a prominent member and supporter of the Theosophical Society or community, Lomaland, which was there. Okay, it is a well-known fact. This is just like one sentence from Wikipedia. If you dig deeper, you see that, this guy Spalding, like theosophy was a big part of his life. So now we go and we look back at Doubleday. In the summer of 1878, Doubleday lived in Mendham Township, New Jersey, and became a prominent member of the Theosophical Society. When the two founders of the society, H.P. Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott, when they moved to India, he was constituted as the president of the American body. Like they're saying that he was the president of the Theosophical Society. And I'm making an assumption that everyone, knows what the Theosophical Society is, but at the very least, the entire Western New Age understanding was introduced into the minds through the Theosophical Society. And Abner Doubleday was their president. Spalding was a prominent member who 20 years later, after him becoming president, named this prominent theosophist, named a former theosophical president as the inventor of baseball in this false reality. That's what we have. So this is how you create false realities. You go and you put it out there, it takes root, and then it becomes something. It becomes something. So if you listen to my work, you may have heard these stories before. So now we're going to start going a little bit deeper. So what we want to do is we want to look at Doubleday Field. So Doubleday Field is in the town of Cooperstown. Okay, this is a baseball field which is named after Abner Doubleday, a block away from the Baseball Hall of Fame's physical location, and it is significant because according to the Doubleday myth. So realize this, it is understood in the minds of baseball historians that Abner Doubleday, and I don't even want to get into the details, but that he didn't invent the game. It doesn't make sense. The logic which was used to credit Doubleday for inventing the game, like you poke holes through those stories very quickly. That's why it says by now it's been disputed. No one believes it. But nonetheless, there is then this paralleled mythology that Abner Doubleday invented this game of baseball in Cooperstown in 1839, and he invented it at, I don't know how to pronounce this, Elihu Finney's farm. So this is the Elihu Finney's farm, is where it was said that he invented baseball, and then they built this stadium, which is called the Doubleday Stadium. And as you can see right here, baseball was invented. They're putting it quotation marks in the year 1839. This baseball park, so they're talking about the modern day Doubleday Field, was erected on the same site. So at one point they're saying like, oh, we know he didn't invent baseball here, but this is where he invented baseball. He invented on this field in this farm from 100 years ago. This is where he came up with the rules. And now we have Doubleday Field. And so this is not a real thing, but it is real. These are false realities that are being built into the consciousness. Now, this is only on this baseball level, but this is how reality is created. It starts in these very mundane levels. So where I'm going with all of this about baseball field, so here we go, is the fact that this Doubleday Field, which is said to be the home of baseball, where this literal ground, this hollow ground, if you will, just like Gettysburg is said to be hollow ground, this hollow ground from a baseball perspective is where the game which you love was invented on this farm. And so this is where it began, which puts every baseball diamond, every baseball field in a harmony, in a resonance with this origin. Absolutely independent of the fact of if it happened or did not happen. It doesn't matter. You've got thousands and thousands of people not even thinking, like walking around and putting masks on their face because it's the reality. Regardless of how it got there, it has become a reality. And in a certain way, this has become true. It's become manifest. So we've got from this false reality, from this ball consciousness, this is not only is this baseball diamond, worked into the collective consciousness of all Americans, it is also 1,600 feet from the headwaters of the Susquehanna River. Now, I've talked about the significance of this a whole bunch. I'm not going to go into it, but this is all the same land. This is less than a mile away. This is where so I'll read a little bit of this. Doubleday Field is renowned the world over, a recognizable name to baseball fans, despite the fact that it's nestled in the center of a village of only 2,000 inhabitants. So we see here the grounds have been used for baseball since 1920. They're talking about when the field was built on what was originally this guy Finney's farm. So let's look a little bit about Finney. Finney was invited to Cooperstown by Judge William Cooper, who Cooperstown is named after. If you're familiar with the author Cooper, like this is his father, the guy who wrote, what did he write? Was it Last of the Mohicans? I think it was Last of the Mohicans. That's why it takes place in Cooperstown. Like this is the guy where it comes from. He invites Finney. Finney then goes and starts a publishing and printing house there. And then he was really well known for printing Bibles. And in fact, Joseph Smith used one of Finney's Bibles in order for his translation to create the Mormon Bible.
Book of Mormon.
So like we can go and see there are so many metaphysical, spiritual, energetic links that are all going to this farm, which is right on whether it's the Mormon, the baseball, all baseball diamonds are in harmony, are connected on a certain level of reality to this spot, All right. This is how we create false realities. You know, we see this picture right here. We've got this picture of it. Look at this. Like, I mean, this is literally a Norman Rockwell painting. Like you've got this picturesque town. This is known as Glimmerglass Lake. This is where right here where my cursor is where the headwaters are. It then begins the 444-mile journey to the Chesapeake Bay. Like, I mean, look at this. We've got this map right here. So now where I want to go is what is a baseball diamond? So we could look at this model. We can see that a baseball diamond, like the idea of a baseball diamond is grounded in reality at this place. And it is in harmony through, like, you know, you could look at it like sacred geometry, like whenever, like all of these different sacred geometry or geometric shapes are in a certain degree of harmony with one another. And so we're going to look at the diamond and be like, well, what is this instrument which is being used to create these connections all throughout? Wherever you find a baseball diamond, this is what we got going on. So if you're familiar with this type of thought, like I'm not the first person who's thought this way. I think I might be the first person who suggested, like, you know, that this is a web using baseball to then connect, you know, all baseball diamonds across, you know, Earth to this one location. But within this school of thought, what's often brought up is the similarity between the baseball diamond and the Masonic compass and square. And there's definitely a truth to that. And where I'm going to go is a little bit different. But if you know your history, if you know your Masonic lore, well, you know, you're going to see that this overlaps. But I'm going to look at the baseball diamond from a different lens. I'm going to look at it from the lens of a yantra. And so if you're not familiar with the yantra, this is just like, you know, some pictures of yantras. It goes back, you know, at least I think of it as being tied into the Vedic culture, the ancient culture of India. And what a yantra is you have this geometric diagram in a circle and it's surrounded by a square. So now we've got some Freemasonic sort of symbology with the circle and the square. And then these flaps on the end of the square, these are called gates. Okay. And the reason why yantra makes sense as a way to look at the baseball diamond is because theosophy, the theosophical perspective, the theosophical society is grounded, or a big part of their foundational outlook also goes back to the Vedics and to ancient India. And this is where we see, like, as I said before, like a lot of like the new age understanding or of reality. You know, it's the old age, you know, this is part of the old age. So in theosophy, yantras are very, very important. And, you know, they come from a Hindu and a Buddhist, from Buddhist and Hindu sacred rites. But when encountered in theosophical writing or in Hindu philosophy, this yantra, this shapes, it refers to a mystic diagram. And the diagrams are intended to channel psychic forces. All right. We've got these all over the world, you know. A yantra can be drawn or engaged on metal, stone, skin, paper, or the ground. This might be said that the yantra symbolizes cosmic manifestation out of primordial unity. So remember, this is the theosophical kind of perspective. I mean, what a yantra is, inside each one of these squares is the circle, and then the different geometric patterns are going to correspond with maybe a different deity or a different quality or of something of a spiritual nature. And by meditating and focused upon it, the person is in alignment with this energy being, whatever you want to call it, and they're called in through these gates. Okay. And so we see this as part of a theosophical perspective. And we know that the theosophical perspective is playing a very, very big part within baseball diamonds, and then also linking it to the Susquehanna River, which to me is how these ideas are then linked deeper onto baseline reality. But we're going to begin to look at the baseball diamond as a yantra. And what do you use a yantra for? As a concentration and a manifestation of cosmic forces. So this is what a baseball diamond typically looks like. And what we're going to see is we're going to see two different yantras. We're going to see two different circles, which are overlapped. They're not concentric. They're not like on the same center, but we'll see where two exist. So the first one is centered on this. I mean, there's quite literally a pitcher's mound. There is a mound in the center of these yantras. And what we have here is this square, and we've got the circle as the mound right here. It's surrounded by a square. It's implying this level of geometry. At every corner is another circle. We've got another circle. We've got another circle. We've got another circle. Then we've got a square there. We've got a square there. We've got a square there. What we have here is actually a pentagram. And all of this is, if you could imagine, you put a compass point on the center of this mound. So you put the compass point right here. This is where and you brought it to this line, or, at the end of the infield, and you did a circle around it. It makes a perfect circle. And you could see this square is encapsulated within this, this circle encapsulates this square, which then encapsulates this circle inside. So let's go look at the infield with a little bit of a different perspective. And so I'm taking this literal, but we're thinking about this in terms of a very, very deep level of understanding energy and patterns and stuff like that. So here's our baseball diamond right here. And so I go and I start looking at different yantras, and most yantras, they look like this, and this is, I'm looking to see if I can find anything that kind of fits or is similar to this basic shape. And, pretty quickly, I find this right here, this yantra, and it's for Kal Sarp. And so by no means am I a Vedic expert. So I'm kind of cherry picking here. So I'm going to do my best to walk through it. I'm going to walk this through the best way I understand it. But first I want to look at the shape. Look right here. We've got this baseball diamond right here, and we've got these circles at each of the corners right here. And it's very similar that we've got this right here. We've got the circles. We've got the circles. It's not exactly the same, but I can see a similarity. But what's so interesting to me is that there are these 4 cubes right here, 3 by 3 cubes. And you don't see that again, I'm not an expert, but from the knowledge which I have, you don't see these cubes in the yantras very often. So now when we begin thinking about baseball, like baseball is known as this 3 by 3, at least the score is kept 3 by 3, 3 strikes you're out, three outs per inning. So we're beginning to see numbers come into play. And so the name of this yantra is the Kal Sarp. And this is seemingly, from the way I understand it, I'm not an expert of Vedic astrology. This is actually used as a protective talisman, if you will, from something which is called Kal Sarp, which I believe is either a planetary configuration or it is a specific place in the Vedic zodiac. And Kal Sarp means death snake. Translates loosely into death snake. And so this is like a protection from the death snake. So this here is kind of like the yantra to that. Go. Yes.
Do you think those squares are like those magic numbers?
I'm certainly open to that.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where like no matter if you look horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, all the numbers will the way
like a magic square, like a Franklin square.
Yes.
That's
hard for me to see the detail on it.
They're not they look like I can't read Sanskrit. I'm looking at this. They're planetary. So let me go and expand this. So I to be quite honest, haven't looked that close, but I can see that's Taurus, right? It looks like Taurus. And I know that this has an astrological correspondence. I mean, this right here looks a little bit like Scorpio on end. Vedic astrology is different than Western astrology, though it does have a lot of similarities. So maybe this corresponds with those glyphs. I don't know. But the idea of what a magic square represents, like where no matter which way you look at that square, the numbers add up. That I think there's a truth to that, in workings with if you're working with magic squares, you're trying to hack at a certain level of reality. And this is seemingly that type of mindset. That's how I see it, at least.
Right.
And if these are actual numbers, and they could be, I don't know. I would be very curious to look at them and see if they do add up to a magic square sort of way. But nonetheless, like if you look at like baseball is all about numbers. Every position has like a numerical equivalent. Like if in the old times, like when people would watch baseball, like think about the mentality. If you were a baseball fan and you went to a baseball game, the amount of concentration it required, like if you've ever sat with a real baseball fan who understands the details of it. Like I'm not that guy, but I like to, if I'm going to watch baseball, I'm going to want to sit next to that guy because that guy's going to explain to me, it's like, look how they're doing this and look how they're doing that. And like explaining these subtleties. Baseball is a subtle game, but these folks would sit and watch these 2-3 hour games and they would keep score. And they would like, if you've ever seen someone fill out like the score box as they're participating in it with their energies and their numbers, like everything's a number and everything's concentration on this, like it on a certain level. There's a magic square with numbers going on this, like how literal or how sharply does this parallel to like an actual magic square? I don't know, but in a very general sort of way of creating reality, this is pulling people in all over the world, the same geometric patterns, working with numbers, concentrating, getting like emotion, like cheering and disappointment. Like this is happening. It's definitely happening. This came from, I was working this idea out through Jesse. So, our friend Jesse. Jesse is much, much more knowledgeable about baseball than I am. So a lot of my baseball questions, particularly playing baseball. So I'd go to Jesse. So I'm talking to Jesse about this, and Jesse brought up something which is interesting because I was kind of like, I was talking about the 3 strikes and 3 outs and this sort of stuff. And he's like, there's another number. There's another number. And it's only used once within baseball. Do you know what that is? And I'm like, no, I don't. And he's like, when you get walked. And he's like, what happens when you get walked? The umpire yells ball 4. Right? So now we're going to go and we're going to start looking at ball 4, right?
Yes.
So I'm not going to go down that line, but if you go and you look a little bit at Gerald, I'm not saying this was done consciously, but I am saying this is in harmony. If you go and you look at Alfred Balfour, the guy behind the Balfour Declaration, the guy like completely changed the trajectory, at least on a geopolitical level, of a certain part of the world. Like, you know, this ties in.
World.
I'm sorry?
The whole world.
Fair point. The entire world.
Well, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not at all. I didn't want to go. I just wanted to pull that out. And like, that was Jesse's perspective, but I want to move back to then the second yantra. The first yantra is found right here. And the second one is a little bit less spectacular, if you will, but it's the primary one. So this center is based upon the point of home plate. So you got a square, you got a square, you got a square, and then you have a non-perfect pentagram. Like, this isn't a perfect pentagram, but it is a 5-sided object. And from this point right here, if you put your compass point, you would go and you would trace a circle, and you would get a complete circle that's implied, that's being implied. So what I've shown right here, this is done completely in proportion with an actual baseball diamond. I use like a standard or one professional. I forget which stadium I used, but I used their specific dimensions and I kept the same proportions. So this green circle is centered around this white dot in the center of this red circle. And we could see here's the other yantra, which sits on top of it. They're not exactly lined up. So let's go look at this right here. We see that this green is encapsulated on what I'm showing as a perfect 5-pointed star, but in reality, it's going to look like this. And so I went and I was looking. It's less common to find a 5-pointed star yantra, but I did find one. And this 5-pointed star yantra is a yantra to Kali. So we'll go back to here. This is the Kal Sarp, which means death snake, where Kal is it's seemingly from the same root as Kali. And Kali is like kind of the goddess of destruction and like the death part of the cycle. And so now we've got this mantra, all the folks coming in through the gates, these are gates right here. And they go into the stadium and they've got this double yantra where there's both like, a calling into Kali, but then even more in the center, there's like a protective talisman too. That's seemingly what's being indicated. And again, this is me looking at just the way things are and just like telling like these are the details of the story which is around us. Exactly how this what came to be, is this done consciously as I'm suggesting? I can't say that. That's outside of my pay grade. I'm just saying this is what I see, and this is why I'm reaching this conclusion. And it's a very, very logical conclusion if you look at all of the information which is available. I got 2 more slides of baseball, and then I want to open up to any more questions. So another thing which is part of this Cooperstown, and I'm just giving a small piece of Cooperstown. Like, I've talked a lot about Cooperstown, talked a lot about baseball. I've talked a lot about the people who are behind baseball. So I don't really want to go into that too much because that's 3 hours on itself. But I did want to bring up this last point. So the Baseball Hall of Fame is there because of the Singer family. And the Singer family was an upper crust, a financially upper crust family, particularly during the Gilded Age. And they made their money through the Singer sewing machine, the Singer sewing machine manufacturing company. Like, that's how they became rich. and the grandson of one of the co-founders, he's the guy, Stephen Clark. He's the guy who funded and established the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I believe it's his daughter who still is like the head of the nonprofit organization that's behind the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's a Clark. So that being said, these are two towers. These are two towers which are built upon the Cooperstown, one on the lake and one like off of the water, both part of the Clark family. And I'm going to come to towers in a moment, but I'm going to point them out. This one right here, and it's known as the Kingfisher Tower. And it was built by Edward Clark in 1876. It's the same guy who built the Dakota apartment building in New York City, where Rosemary's Baby, the film depicting birth of the Antichrist, and John Lennon's assassination. Like the same guy who built that, like he built this tower right here. And then I believe it was his son, or maybe it was his grandson. This is about a mile inland. He built this Druidic tower right here, which is in public land, but there's a wrought iron fence that surrounds it. But this is another Clark Tower. These are different expressions of this tower idea, but I want to point that out, that this is significant. These towers are significant to the family, the lineage, the people who are responsible for really anchoring baseball to the Susquehanna and to Cooperstown. Because if they did not build the Baseball Hall of Fame here, then the Doubleday myth would have just evaporated. It would have evaporated. That false reality would have, like, you know what? People would have seen through it, and they're like, oh, the Doubleday didn't invent it. They invented it in New Jersey at Elysian Fields. That's what, like, the real historians say. That in Hoboken, New Jersey is where they say it was invented, but it doesn't matter. Cooperstown got it. So we want to look at, like, this is where I'm talking about consciousness. This is all in the background. This is like, this is how we see reality, and then this is how you create false realities into true or like factual realities. We're witnessing this right now. So before I get into the third part, I want to pause and hear any questions, comments, anything along those lines as it relates to this baseball connection to the Susquehanna River and connected to all the other baseball fields across Earth.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Doubleday is kind of using the game. Well, he created the game of baseball using like Sanskrit mandala principle to create a grid work of occupying the mounds that overlays this false reality.
So excellent question or place for clarification. So I would say it's slightly different. I would say this, that the baseball fields are a grid work that, every hometown, every school, every place people get together. This is a grid work, which all comes back to this point. And this is built upon or an understanding of geometries and
divine mathematics.
Divine mathematics. Perfect. So I will say, I'll begin with that being the factual truth. Now, what I'm going to say is, I don't think Doubleday had anything to do with it. I think Doubleday is just like, he was chosen. I don't know how the baseball field came to be. No one is telling you this, but what we know is Albert Spalding, the theosophist, is linking all of this. He's kind of like, baseball would be whatever baseball is going to be, was going to be. They're linking it to the river, and they're linking it, what I think is like, with a great deal of knowledge of the true significance of baseball. And I think we talked a little bit about this before. Baseball is definitely not like, an invented game in 1839. It may have been tweaked. It may have been updated It certainly seems to have connections to this game Rounders, but if you start digging a little bit deeper, you're like, no, this goes back like thousands and thousands of years. They played it in the Southwest United States or the Southwest North America. Like there's lots of indications that this is an ancient pre-Diluvian sort of thing.
Right, absolutely.
So the way which I see it is there's nothing more apple pie than baseball. There's nothing more like this is how the fall, like going back to the ball consciousness. We're born into ball consciousness. We don't think it's a thing. We just think this is how life is. And there are all of these ways in which it's propagated. And this is one of those ways in which it's propagated. And you think about where you're finding baseball fields, like, schools and like community centers. And like, it's like what it represents. It is past time. It is eternal. Right. Like I don't think anyone's doing this consciously. It's maybe a small percent. I think this is a wheel in motion which just propagates itself. It propagates itself because folks are not paying attention. It's very possible baseball will be gone in 20 years, as like, this other reality is being created. Like, maybe it's just digital baseball, people don't even know the difference. What I'm most interested in is showing how there are what I'm most interested in being able to introduce are these webs of energy, of consciousness, which are more or less convoluted. They're created. They're false realities. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but they're not like universally true. And these are all of these background sort of things which keep us connected. We talk about like the like ball worship in this very, very like grandiose way, but it's the small connections which keep us, and this just being one of them, which keep us connected to it. This is just one example. This is a way of thinking as a
social fabric.
Bingo.
Is ball worship, and we don't even know it. Some know it.
We are seeing life through that. So I mean, that's. If I was thinking a lot about this, like the Singer sewing machine, it changed the way people wore clothes. It changed fabric. You were talking about like, the fabric of reality, like Singer sewing machine, like all of a sudden it changed like the way people, which they would sew and like hand weaving. And like that sort of like, that kind of went away because the Singer sewing machine put an electronic sewing machine in everybody's home.
Right.
This was a transitional step. We look at it now in this kind of like post-world, post-industrial age sort of like lens, like, oh, that's kind of quaint or it's grandma. Like, no, this was cutting edge stuff. This changed the way which people lived in a very, very basic way.
And so you're saying also that baseball was actually invented in Jersey, but the importance of Cooperstown being the headwaters of the Susquehanna, and the Susquehanna being like the mother of rivers and the mother of waters, is being one of these oldest rivers. They put the baseball grid at the headwaters of the Susquehanna to keep the story flowing.
All right. You see right here. So this was created by someone else. They did these green stitches right there, but do you see those red stitches?
Yes.
Those red stitches were done by me. And what I did was then I became a participant in this sort of thing. And I did that weaving. And weaving is such a powerful symbol and literal like ritual, like weaving together things. What I did physically also happened on another level. The Doubleday Cooperstown took baseball, like whatever baseball is. Like, I'm not saying like maybe like modern baseball was created in Hoboken. I don't really think it matters. I know baseball is much, much older and it's part of a ball program. Whether
Right.
like to me, like saying, well, actually it was done in Hoboken rather than Cooperstown is like, well, actually, no, like, the Republicans are better than the Democrats are better than the Republicans. Like it's like on a certain level, that's true, but
Pointless to really argue.
it doesn't, but there is a connection. And I think there's something interesting about the language of the which is used in Hoboken. But what I can say in material reality is this is where they wove this particular story, connecting all of this theosophical perspective and whatever baseball could be, like into the river, in that period of time, for whatever reason. Like this has happened. This is how we can see that false realities are woven. And it's not just like propaganda. It's not just like, the modern propaganda being like algorithms and echo chambers within social media. And like prior to that was like the power of slogans. And like, we're seeing there are all of these different techniques and ways which we're born into, which have created these false realities. Remember, I said in the beginning, a false reality only exists as long as it's being fed.
Right.
Because true reality exists regardless if you're feeding it. It's a false reality. And I'm not saying don't have false realities. I got tons of false realities. As soon as you tell yourself a story, it's just you understand what your false reality is. Like, when I say this is me weaving something in, like, that's a story, that's a false reality, but it's based upon a truth. I'm really weaving with someone who I have a connection. They were in the same part of Peru I was, and I'm making an intention. There's that becomes my story. You were talking about purpose, is where we begin to have more impact on an understanding of our own realities. What I'm hoping to do with all of this is not so much about the details of like the Cooperstown, as much as like, one, this is how false realities, one of the ways which this false reality was created.
All false realities that we're living within, and just accept.
And be able to see it, what it is.
Yeah.
To see what it is. What is the real reality? We've got this river. What is the most real thing you could do? You could put your feet in it. You can walk around about it. You can have your own story with it. You don't need a middleman. And here's the thing, I talked about feeding with energy. Every year they do the Baseball Hall of Fame induction ceremony. You've got tens of thousands of people, fans, loving, like seeing like their heroes get inducted. What I call the Hall of Ascended Masters. That's what the Baseball Hall of Fame is to me. They are them. And there are lots of ways to even tweak that story. But nonetheless, that happens on the midpoint between the summer solstice and the spring or the fall equinox. It's always the first weekend of August, right around August 1st or 2nd, it falls there. It's a secular energy being flowed into it. We've got the same thing with on Imbolc on February 2nd at Puxatawney, Pennsylvania, with the Groundhog's Day. Like this is it. And so it's like
Puxatawney is on the Susquehanna as well.
It's probably, so it gets a little bit complicated. The western branch is the mystery branch. It's a left-handed path. And so what I mean by that is no one knows where the Susquehanna actually begins.
Wow.
Now, on the western branch, on the right hand or the north branch, it's as obvious as the hand in front of your face. You could see it come out of this river and it goes down. But because of the west branch, how it's situated, there are thousands and thousands of different streams, and like eventually like they gather together and they become the west branch. And where that actually is up to debate. That being said, it's basically where Puxatawney is.
I got you.
So it's like Puxatawney is probably within 10 miles of like the general area of where it's said to be.
Yes.
So again, the purpose of this is really understanding consciousness and second natures, like, how we incorporate these different things that are happening behind the scenes into our lens of reality. And as we begin to see it, particularly the false ones, like the observer changes the outcome of the experiment. And so
Yeah.
it is my opinion, we are in a time right now where there's a big program which is happening. A program is a ship, just like we talked about the introduction of this or that. They're always happening. And it is during these times you have the best opportunity for the greatest number of people to actually see with a greater awareness what is going on.
Mm.
All right. So now I'm going to go to the third section, and I'm going to see if I could bring this to now, like less about me talking about information which I don't really know firsthand, to information which I do know firsthand. And I'm going to talk about this trip, which I just took this past weekend. It was down to Williamsburg, Virginia, and Jamestown, Virginia. And so if you're familiar with the Susquehanna mystery and the Susquehanna river work, like Jamestown plays a big part of it. So this here's the Susquehanna River. This is right here, Cooperstown, where we got our Herkimer diamonds. Right here is where we find Western Branch, Puxatawney is right here. We come here. This is where electricity was developed. This is where the man who is said to have killed alchemy and birth chemistry, this is where he lived, Joseph Priestley, first computer, all the way down here. Susquehanna transitions into the Chesapeake Bay, same body of water. And then right here is where we have Jamestown. And so this is one end, this is the other. Jamestown's located probably right here. And Williamsburg is close to, Williamsburg is about 5 miles away from Jamestown. So when I talk about Jamestown, it always begins with this, the John Smith map of Virginia. We've talked about this. We've talked about the Susquehanna many times, and like the significance. And often what I've done is I've used this image in multiple comparisons. I've used this, there's so much in this pictograph, but one of them has always been like in comparison to George Washington in Freemasonic attire laying the capstone. We could see the similarity between aprons with the fold over and the fringes. We see the jewel in the collar. We got the jewel in the collar. Got a general similarity in feet, like, weight on one foot, this foot pointing outward. So we've got some stuff going on. But now, because we're just talking about baseball, we're going to change the way we look at this just a little bit. That's going to be like the initial link of how we're going to go down into the ball worship. And the reason why Jamestown is so significant in this map. So this map is the John Smith map of Virginia. John Smith is the leader of the Jamestown colony. Most people probably know John Smith as the male lead in the Disney classic Pocahontas, because that is also part of the mythology and the storyline of the false realities in which are being created. So, okay, so Jamestown, why is Jamestown important? So I'm down at Jamestown, and here are two pictures I saw. So this is inside, this is outside. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. On May 14th, 1607, at a spot a mile from where you are standing now, a group of 104 colonists disembarked from their 3 small sailing ships to establish the first permanent English settlement in North America. This settlement, called Jamestown, is where the United States of America really began. The founding of Jamestown sparked a series of cultural encounters that helped shape our nation in the world. When you hear about shaping the world, you're talking about creating false realities. Like, they're experientially true. Now Cooperstown is really like the epicenter of baseball, but it was built upon something which was maybe not factual or something entirely different. What we're looking at right now, and so much of our experience, is the shaping of reality and how we live. And as you indicated in the previous presentation, is like there has been shaping of the way people lived for a very, very long time. and we can begin to identify when there are different shifts. This is a long-term program, but there are lots of projects, and the projects are usually marked with a beginning and an end. And so Jamestown marks a very, very important beginning of another project, which seemingly came to an end in 2007, but we're still moving through it right now. So let me go and read this. This is another plaque which they have there, and just think about what this is. At Jamestown began. Like, just so there's no mistakes on this. And this grammar sounds a little bit like either archaic or even maybe just plain wrong, but that couldn't have been a mistake. This is written in a certain style. At Jamestown began the expansion overseas of the English-speaking peoples. Think about the world we live in. Like, think about, like, not even all the countries where English is the primary language, but all countries where English is spoken. English is the de facto language of business, and we live in a world where it's ruled by money and it's managed by business, by busyness. Right. That's enterprise, always working, busyness, business. So English is expanded all over Earth, and this is where it began. Prior to 1607, just a small part of the world spoke this language, English. Small number of people, and now it's spoken everywhere. And this is where that first began. This is where that first weave began. Then the Commonwealth of Virginia. All right, it's the beginning of the state of Virginia. It's the began of the United States of America. And look at the United States of America's influence on modern culture, maybe even, both in terms of like, a warring kind of like governmental sort of impact, but then also in terms of culturally, all of the things which we have brought to the entire world in every way. Like, this isn't judgment. This is just recognizing the influence of the world, like everything from like Hollywood culture to like, sports, to like hip hop culture, to like, fashions, like all of these things which are inherently, beginning in the United States of America, which have spread and influenced throughout the world. Like, this is where that first weave took place. That's where that first stitch was made. And then it says right here, it's the very beginning of the British Commonwealth of Nations, which I think is just like kind of like a nice way of saying, the British Empire.
Colony.
Yeah, like no one wants to hear like, empire is no longer a good word. Like, they do that all the time. Oh, this was a word we're once allowed to say, and now we don't say this word. Like, always changing it, like getting people like, that's not reality. That's false reality. Like, it's real, but like if you live in that reality, you're living in this other sort of web which was created. But we can see right here the significance of this place, Jamestown. All right. So the reason I'm showing you all this, because I want to talk a little bit about like realities and like false realities. And I talked about the importance of Cooperstown being sewn in right here. But this is where it began. This is where Jamestown began. This was this first thing. This has been encapsulated. Whatever a river is, and we're talking baseline reality, so we're not defining it. Whatever this is immensely significant. Both we know from its geology and from the history which has taken place upon it. So this plaque was placed in 1957. It was the 350th anniversary, of Jamestown's, of the establishment of all of this. And it is at the base of this tower. All right. So I go to Jamestown, and it is, like, it's like legit. It's like legit, like the Smithsonian's legit. It's like a lot of money's gone to this. They got a big parking lot. The buildings are really nice. Like, it is done. Like, if you've got a lot of money to throw at a museum, a lot of money has been thrown at a museum. And this was thrown at it. And it was, you could see how important it is to these people. And they built this tower. And I do this a lot. I look at towers and then I go and I do all sorts of research. I'm like, well, who built it? What year did they build it? What architecture firm? What are the dimensions? What is written upon it? Like, who are the people? Like, these are the questions which I have, particularly when I see towers. And I pointed out these towers right here in Cooperstown. Well, the two things which I'm going to say about this tower are, one, and this, I guess, is just purely subjective, but it's one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. It's absolutely ugly. There's no kind of like artistry. Like I particularly like looking at this tower, like look how like just the craftsmanship and the beauty, like regardless of whatever it's being used. And like, you know, what's been done in this tower. This tower is friggin' hideous. It seemingly has like some very purposeful brickwork, but there's no information on it. I spent at least 2.5 hours trying to get anything I could on it, and I couldn't find anything other than the fact that it exists. So I just want to say that this tower exists. We don't know much about it, but we see this tower is there. Now, the other thing which I want to point out, so there's information which is being hidden. Now, the other thing I want to point out is I was very excited to go to this museum because I've done so much work on researching Jamestown, and I've done it all kind of remotely. I'm like, I want to see what it looks like in real life. I want to see how they present it. I want to see how this is approached, you know, just like no expectation, just kind of like, I want to see how it's done. I want to see behind the curtains. The two things which I find from my lens, from what I pay attention, the two things which I find most interesting about Jamestown is one, this map, and particularly this reversed 40, this mirrored 40, which is in it, and then also the connection which Jamestown has to Francis Bacon. And both of these things are pretty well established. Like this, it's well established in the fact that you can see it with your own eyes. If you look at this map, you can see that this 40 is written backwards. And then secondly, like, you know, it's just part of history that Francis Bacon had a major part in the colonization scheme in North America and was on the executive council of the Jamestown settlement. And he wrote 2 of their charters. So what I found most fascinating, that in this huge museum, huge might not be, a well-done museum, there was not one mention of Francis Bacon, and there is not one image of the John Smith map. They talked a little bit about John Smith, and they showed like pieces of the John Smith map, like of the Susquehanna, but they didn't, but it was just completely written off. Like it was just completely ignored. In the same way, there's nothing about this tower. This tower is just there. So I'm going to walk you through this. I'll give you, this is me walking through the entire place. You can see that this is a really well done museum with exhibits which you get to walk within, immerse yourself in the experience. They've got like maps all over the place. They've got pictures. They've got all this stuff. And
not one mention of Francis Bacon.
No mention of Francis Bacon.
That's like
about a 2-minute video, so we'll go walk through this, and then I want you to see, like, I'm just continuing to walk through this.
That's like going to Africa and not seeing any mention of the road to the cross.
Exactly. Ding, ding, ding. Like I keep on going to new places. This is all new. These are artifacts. These are the cannons. These are, you can see the maps in the background.
Sorry.
This is the only thing on John Smith. there's a picture from the map, but that's all they show.
Good.
More interesting is what isn't in here.
Yeah.
I saw her.
Right, too, man. They put a lot into it.
This is legit. This is a deep experiential. So I just walked through the whole length.
Not a single mention of the John Smith map, Francis Bacon. All of that is eliminated or not included within this exhibit.
So we're talking about creating false realities, right? You know, there are many ways to do it. You give one story and you hide another story. For whatever reason, this is completely eliminated. Like, it's not like done like they're hiding it. They're just not talking about it.
Right.
And so we go and we see, like, this is just like, I just typed in, like, as an example, this is an article called 10 Things About Francis Bacon. He played just normal history. He played a key role in the creation of the English colony, especially Virginia. Absolutely no mention in this place. And this place is an experiential museum. You walk around, or outside they've got replicas of the boats you can go on. They've got replicas of the indigenous village. They've got replicas of the Jamestown fort, which you could walk through with like actors dressed in costume who you could talk to. Like, this is an immersive false reality experience.
Wow.
And so, like, there's been so much talk about all of the Francis Bacon stuff is really well documented. So this is Jamestown, and then this is Williamsburg. Williamsburg is 6 miles away. And so I want to talk just a little bit about Williamsburg and its significance. So Jamestown was the settlement started in the early 1600s. And then in the late 1600s, Jamestown, which was also the capital of the Virginia colony, they moved that capital from Jamestown to Williamsburg for a variety of reasons. And if you're familiar with the Bacon Rebellion, which supposedly has nothing to do with Francis Bacon, it just has the same name, Bacon. That was
his family.
That is one of the, yes. So you see that it was like a half, like somehow like there was like a half relation. The deeper you go and you look at Nathan Bacon, undoubtedly, like, there's a connection. And the Bacon Rebellion had a lot of there's a lot to that story, but that was the impetus of moving it to Williamsburg. And Williamsburg was the capital for maybe 100 years or so, until Thomas Jefferson moved it to Richmond. But during this short period of time in Williamsburg, a couple of things. William and Mary College was established. It's the second oldest college within North America, Harvard being the oldest, then William and Mary. And William Mary is also the oldest law school, I believe. And Williamsburg was it was well-to-do. It was like for like the top 1%, 0.01% of colony living. Like Williamsburg was this real fancy sort of place. And so right now there's this thing called Colonial Williamsburg, which is a living museum where you go and all of these buildings have been brought back to life. But the truth of the matter is the whole thing's a false reality. The whole thing is like made up. Some of it like maybe more accurate than others, but it doesn't matter. Like when you go to it and you become immersed into it, it becomes real. It becomes real. Like this is a model of creating deep. And I'm not saying Williamsburg is a bad thing and don't go to it. I'm saying like Williamsburg is an example of like, just like in the most mundane ways, how consciousness, how consciousness is manipulated all the time, and we look at it as awesome. But this is like literally how it goes. So you go to Williamsburg, and like they have over 200 buildings. So actually, I'm going to take a step back. Where to go with this? So Williamsburg began by John D. Colonial Williamsburg, excuse me. So Williamsburg, like once Richmond became the capital, then with the exception of Williamsburg's got two things going on. It's got the nation's oldest law school, and it's got the first state psychiatric ward, the first psychiatric hospital, Eastern State Hospital in the colonies. So that's on Williamsburg. Williamsburg kind of like dissipated. And then in the late 20s, John D. Rockefeller Jr. comes in and he's like, hey, I'm going to pump in a ton of money. And he creates Colonial Williamsburg, and they rebuild all of these buildings. Like, but it's not what they are. Like, half the buildings are made up, and you walk around like, but the point I'm trying to make, and I'll just leave it at this level of reality. The point I want to make, this is a Rockefeller funded operation. This is a very, very significant location on the material earth for a variety of reasons. Okay. This is the person who is behind, who really made this happen. I was looking at the Hall of Philanthropy. There was one section, which was, I think it was, donations of $25 million or more. And one of the names on there was what was the name? Wallace DeWitt. This is the guy who made his billions from Reader's Digest. He's the Reader's Digest magnate. Reader's Digest is all about taking like big works of literature or of history and giving you a Cliff Notes version. It's about hiding, like, you could look at it from like a skeptical perspective or, a practical perspective. But the truth of the matter is it's giving you a watered down version of a real thing. That's what this is all about. And some of the things, like if you begin to go and you look like this 1957 arrival in Jamestown, it was visited by Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II, shortly after her coronation. And so Queen Elizabeth I is when the British Empire began, right? You have, it was underneath her reign that John Dee came up with the idea of the British Empire. And then it was under Queen Elizabeth II where it kind of comes to a head. So this idea of like John Dee and John D. Rockefeller, I'm finding definitely very interesting, this whole John Dee thing coming into play. But you continue to look like, as you look closely, this area is constantly being drawn to or a magnet to the shapers of reality, whether this here is a picture of Walt Disney. When does it say it was taken? I don't know if it says in this image where it says it was taken, was before the advent of Disneyland, which was the first of the Disney immersion false realities. Like, this is where Walt came to Colonial Williamsburg to learn how to do it, to create this immersive experience. This Queen Elizabeth here in 57. We got Churchill's coming to it. We've got a G7 summit in 83. But this is what I'm going to leave you though with two like kind of like mystical stories. So the first one is the first one isn't so personal, but the second one is. So within the lore of Williamsburg, in the late 30s, Manly P. Hall's wife, and Manly P. Hall became very, very interested in Williamsburg because they found or were convinced or whatever word we want to use to describe, they believed that in Williamsburg, they found a series of secret glyphs from dating back to Francis Bacon, which are pointing to a vault which is buried originally in Jamestown and then moved to Williamsburg under the guise of the Bacon Rebellion. And inside this, it's going to have anything, anything from information about the Emerald Tablet to the conclusion to the New Atlantis to Rosicrucian secrets. But it was taken seriously enough that they wrote books about it. In 1938, Hall's wife was given permission to do an excavation looking for it, which she did not find anything. And then we see again in the late 90s that there was renewed interest with this idea that there is something hidden in beneath the dirt of Williamsburg, which dates back to Francis Bacon, dates back to the very beginning of the establishment. We could see here that in this analysis of this story, this is like, I just cut this from some dude's blog post telling about how in the early 90s, a bunch of folks came, New Age folks came looking for this vault as well. And he's tying it into Manly P. Hall and Manly P. Hall's expertise within Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. But we see that there is also, whether this is factual or not, that there is embedded within the lore that there is information literally buried in this earth in a vault, which, I'm open to that. I don't know if that's factual or not, but I'm like, is this why John D. Rockefeller has found himself there? Is this why we're seeing this money being poured there? John D. Rockefeller is the same guy who started the AMA, the American Medical Association. He started World Health Organization through the Rockefeller Foundation. He's the guy behind the United Nations. He's the guy behind the Council on Foreign Relations. This guy was a major, major, major shaper of reality. Jamestown began, as they said, the shape of the world to come. We can see in the early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller is a shape of what's coming, at that time, and then what's also lying in front of us. So there's something, there's something there.
Definitely.
I would say one last thing, and then I'm going to stop talking because I've been talking for quite a bit. So this is from my own experience. So I'm down there like on a family trip. It was a family vacation. It was like a reunion, if you will. It just so happened to be in Williamsburg. And so there were like, there's children around and we're walking around Williamsburg. We're doing the touristy thing. I've got both hats on, I've got the family man hat, but I also got like the mystic mystery man hat. And we come across one of the things which makes Williamstown appealing to so many people is the fact that it has living archaeology. There are constant archaeological digs happening, and you can walk up and you could talk to the archaeologist and you'd be like, hey, what are you working on, buddy? And so what they were doing while we were there was at like the Custis Mansion. So apparently the Custis was like the wealthiest man in the wealthiest city in the wealthiest colony, but it was his land, and they were looking for fence posts because he supposedly had a fence around his garden. And one of the things which they said was they found beneath the one of the fence posts was a severed cow's leg. And so they were wondering where that tradition came from. But they passed that, and we were walking around. That was the tour guide told us that. And then we were brought to the actual archaeologists doing the work. And so these just regular folks, probably I'd say in their 30s, just did like they've got, if you've ever seen what an archaeological dig looks like, it's a very like precise dig, and they've got it like gridded out, and they're looking at the ground there for parts of this fence. And we start a conversation because I think that's part of their job. They have to interact with the public. And it turns out of like the 4 archaeologists who I had conversations with, and of those 2 people, one went to Millersville University, which is where I live, right on Millersville University. And the other person went to Elizabethtown College. And if you know the diagram of the 3 colleges that surround High Point, it is Franklin and Marshall, York College, and Elizabethtown College. So of all the archaeologists in all the worlds, and I don't think either one of those schools have particularly like, noteworthy archaeology programs. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But of that, I'm down there with a very like focused vision of what's going on. And I find just purely happenstance, the people who I have conversations with, I have an immensely personal connection to, because we shared life, like living in the same space. And so the Manly P. Hall mysticism certainly has me interested, but that as an observer. But when I saw that connection, which I had like just from like human being to human being, like I'm like, there's also something even more, there's something else going on, which is personal as well. So this was, I told you, it was all over the place. I covered a lot of things, but what this is all about is realities, false realities, consciousness, and being able to see more clearly as we go and move forward. So it's with that, Ross, I humbly put my hat back in, and I'd like to hear any thoughts or comments or questions.
Well, my first question is from your right, you're well experienced with the Susquehanna. What was the nature of the Susquehanna like down there in Jamestown?
So it's not called the Susquehanna down there. So
Chesapeake at that point, right?
But it's the same bodies of Jamestown is I'm going to show you this map. It's a great question, but I just want to be very clear with how I describe it. So let me do screen share and here. So we're looking at, what are we looking at? So this is where I was. This is all the Susquehanna River. All of these rivers, which are tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay, are actually, they're tributaries to this main channel, which I call the Susquehanna. Where I was right here, right on, I think it's the James River. It's the James River, and it was really wide. For a variety of reasons, I love that part of the world. That, like, what the climate feels like on my skin, what the air smells like to my nose, what the trees look like to my eyes, what the sunlight looks like to my eyes. There's something about that part of the world that speaks to me. I used to live in Richmond. Richmond's maybe like 50 miles away from there. Like what we call Virginia, I got a soft spot for, like, on a personal level. So I like it down there. Like just in the most like basic level. And I think that also is part of, it's part of what I see as the story of the Susquehanna, because at the end of the day, the Susquehanna can't be tamed. There aren't any cities on it. There isn't like these high populations. They couldn't be tamed because they couldn't put ships on it. That would be the reason. But I like to think about it from a different way. You look at Cooperstown, whatever you want to say about Cooperstown and all the things which we're pointing at. And there's some kind of like dark sort of stuff about that. Cooperstown is charming. It's beautiful. The air smells so good. It's like, the way the leaves turn there, like that part of New York, there's something there. And just at the same at the very bottom where I see where Williamsburg, and they are not heavily populated. And you do get a little bit of a flavor and a taste of what people live like modernly, but not so inundated with what has become our norm. So I love what the river is like down there. I like the fact that like just the highways look nicer down there, and all of that I think is part of like, this can't really be touched. Like there's only so far, like there's a purity that still breathes through. I don't see that in Lancaster. There are parts which I like. I don't see that like in a lot of parts in the mid-state, but I do see it on those endpoints. I definitely see it in those endpoints.
Interesting. Because again, I guess, like you say, this false reality, in my mind, Lancaster is like, Amish purity, like this, like almost going back in time, no or little industry, just, like this pure farmland, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And like, listen, I don't want to, I'm not shitting on people. I'm not talking shit, but I'm going to talk some shit. Like they've been romantic. Each
It's
person is an
romantic. That's what
individual. The
I'm hearing.
culture, that's what I want to say. It's not that I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about a culture. The culture has been romanticized. Amish is as ball can be.
Huh.
It's like we go to the earth and we work the earth. These are beasts of burden put here to work for me. They just don't use electricity, but they do. It is a total workaround. And it is like, there is like, again, like they're individuals. I've had interactions with different individuals, but we've been so disconnected, right? That like, even when we see, like, we put this thing, which is definitely closer. It's closer to something which is more true, I would say. And that doesn't mean like the only truth has to be like, living in a primitive way. I'm just saying like living in harmonies. Like the Amish are the hardest working people I've ever seen. They don't nap. What sort of people don't nap? I worked at an Amish farm for a little bit, which is very rare. It's very uncommon that you'll get like what they would call an English to work on an Amish farm. It was like a CBD farm, and I worked there for a couple months. And I learned, like, I was like, wow, I'm lazy. I never thought of myself as lazy, but being around the Amish, like, I'm lazy. But then also, like,
You're very industrious. And the enterprise, huh?
I'm going to use a generality. I'm not speaking for a group of people, but they look at the English, the English is anyone who's not Amish. They look at us like, slightly above dogs.
Wow.
We're dumb and we're lazy and we don't work hard. And like, if there's a phrase around here, which is called the Mennonite Mafia. And it basically, like, it has a couple different implications, but like they're going to call the shots. There's a hierarchy, and this hierarchy is there's someone who's going to call a shot. And if you're going to get shut out, you're going to get shut out. And there's a lot of parallels.
Right.
There's a lot of parallels to like, La Cosa Nostra. So it's
reaffirming like this is part of this false reality that gets imposed on us, and that's our lens. And interesting.
Well, that's why I began with that like Edenic mindset, and that like, that, and even it's just
That's
a
what
mindset.
Lancaster, that's almost how like the false reality, I guess, of Lancaster. It's presented as almost as close to Eden as you're gonna get.
Yeah.
At least on the East Coast,
Right. Well, you're absolutely right. You're like, it's like, hey, at least you're not like you're not in the middle of an urban environment with just asphalt and like, look right here, this is real living. It's like, I mean, there's some truths to that. It's like, what I find most interesting or most meaningful or purposeful, because I don't think it's helpful to go and say like, this is where we live and this is wrong, and because that doesn't help anyone. What I do find helpful is recognizing at least my first approach in looking at the outer world, whatever it is, and looking at it in this like for me, an apex nurture perspective. Like, wow, look at this. I come down to Williamsburg and there are people from my own hometown right there. This is like, there's a confirmation with that. Like, being able to see, being able to recognize how I've been conditioned to see things in another way, and to consciously or purposefully, where I am able to see it and control it, to not allow that to affect the way I see reality. Like, I love the Amish. I love all my Amish experiences. I love all my experiences living in a city. I used to, I lived in a very, very high dense area. Like, but being able to see things as they are, that's what's important to me.
Yes. Hey, can we go to that John Smith map real quick?
Of course we can.
I was real curious because, right, one of the themes that seemed to come up when I was looking at Ball in America is that there were some indigenous, some groups who seemed to like they were ballers. And the Susquehanna, I think, may have been one. And
I would agree 100%. I would agree 100%.
And right, I think one of the ways that they would indicate the ballers is to give them some, associate some Masonic imagery with them. And, you know, right, the John Smith map being a good example of that. What is that? How does that relate to that Minguas Trail in through Lancaster?
So the Minqua Trail is, I mean, at the very least, the Minqua Trail is a historical marker, but it refers to an east-west walking route, which would go from the Susquehanna River, basically on the 40th parallel to the Delaware. And it was a well-traveled, and I try to picture in my mind, I love to do this sort of stuff, and what it looked like. You know, what does a trail look like? Is it like 5 feet wide? Is it like, you know, are you walking? Is it a road? But that's what the Minqua Trail is. And so the Minqua Trail was really, was the Great Minqua Path, I think is what it's labeled on the historical marker. And it more or less, like, I've heard a couple different versions of where it is, but I think maybe there are multiple ones, but where Route 1 is, Route 30, and possibly 76, like those are all like, maybe they have different different parallels, who knows, but
Route 30 definitely is a straight shot from,
without a doubt.
Yeah.
And the Route 1 goes through something called the Serpentine Barrens. And I was told by someone who would seemingly know that part of what I think it's probably now like Chester County.
Chester County, yes.
Yeah, it's called the Serpentine Barren Parks, and like in this immensely dense wooded area of what we now think of Pennsylvania. Like, it was so dense. Like, I was reading about what it was like in the colonial times, like when it was first arrived, like all the trees were either pine or sycamore, and they were immensely high. 120, 140 feet would be like average, which is really, really high, 10, 14 stories. And they would have a very, very thick canopy, so no light would get down. And there would just be branches at the top. Like, this is what the wooded land would look like. But in the Serpentine Barrens, there was this huge opening where there were no trees, which was naturally occurring.
The soil, the serpentine kind of toxified the soil.
Exactly. And like, I just love thinking, but that seemingly, like, that went through, there were a lot of these trails that went through there. There are trails that went all the way to the copper mines of Michigan. Like, they won't call them the copper mines in the historical markers, but they say, oh, the Great Lakes region. I'm like, where were they going? They were going to the copper mines. And so I agree with you completely with your point about that there was balling going on in North America. Like, there was, like, all things, different people, different, like, maybe different cultures, but undoubtedly the Susquehannocks were. We know that because they were the most dominant and more warlike. We know that because in the John Smith book, he couldn't stop praising and say how amazing they were. They dominated trade. They did. There was a lot of stuff written about them. There seems to be two stories. I've read two different stories of the people we call the Susquehannocks. And so my guess is that by looking at history, how it's presented, there's often like an overlapping or an intermingling of like different peoples. And I think maybe that's happening too, because there's another version of the Susquehannocks where, like, these were gentle giants and these were the peacekeepers, and these were, and so I don't know. I don't know what the truth is, but
and it might be like, who's telling the story?
Who's telling the story?
It might be speaking of a group over different time periods. Maybe at one time they were gentle giants, you know?
And I agree. I agree. And there's I can say that I've fallen into this. There's a tendency to romanticize. Like it doesn't matter, like whatever you identify with, within our world, you're going to identify with something. And then there are certain things that are romanticized from each identification group. And so to me, what's important is to be able to kind of like see things as it is, and not necessarily like say good or bad and pick my sides, but recognize like, okay, this is, let's go through this. What is true? What were you born into? What were they born into? And where am I? And what do we do right now? Like that's what I find empowering and important in my personal journey. And this
I want to research that Minqua Trail more. I think it has a lot of significance. I think that it's the root of why the Susquehanna and the Lenape fell out during the Beaver Wars. The Susquehanna wanting a direct route, direct access to the Atlantic, where they could, because like you say, the Susquehanna is not really navigable compared to the Delaware. And so, yeah.
I would love to hear what you come up about that.
Yes. Yes. What we uncover with it. Because that's what
we
saying.
Uncover. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right, I think that was a whole bunch of stuff. My head is spinning.
Yeah. We could pause here for sure. Let us digest what was revealed here, and then we're going to come forward and chop it up some more. I don't know if ball will be our next episode's topic. Maybe we could shift. I know you said there's a spot out there you've invited me out to come.
I would love, like I'm beginning to realize how much this is the third time, maybe the fourth time like this, like getting out into the field, and that feels so much more real to me. Like when we did it in Wissahickon, when we did it in Ephrata, me and Jesse went to Buchanan's pyramid, like all of this, like this.
Where is that located?
Probably 90 minutes west of where I am.
Okay. So that's out kind of in Cumberland, out where Jesse is.
A little bit far south of that, closer to the Maryland border.
Okay.
I mean, I did a show. If you haven't seen that, you might find it really interesting, about like Fort Ritchie and all sorts of stuff like that. But I want to get out. Like, I'm sorry.
That's on your channel?
I believe so. Yeah, it was. I put that out maybe a month ago, but it was really good. But like this idea of like getting out and looking at the place and talking about the history and seeing what we see with our own eyes, interacting with folks, like I love. That's where, to me, that's what I would like to do and what I'd like to do more of.
Yeah, and feedback I've gotten that people enjoy that as well.
I think so too. It's a whole lot more exciting than seeing some dude in his creepy basement, right? Like everyone's like, what's behind those sheets? What bodies are you hiding?
All right, Mystic Mike, give thanks, man. Yeah, 11/11. I'm sure it met expectations.
There we go. Oh, let me say this one thing. I'm doing on 10/31 from I think it's 2 to 5, and I'll put a link. I'll send you the link if you could share this as well. I'm doing an in-person presentation. I'm going to be talking about consciousness, then specifically about the Susquehanna River, and I'm going to be doing that in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania, which is close to Harrisburg. So if anyone's listening who lives in this greater area, I'd love to see you come out and do the things face to face. So I want to put that out there.
All right. I might be in the house.
I would love to see that.
The 31st.
That's the 31st.
And near
Sunday.
Harrisburg.
Yeah.
All right. Is it a nature setting or it's in the city?
It's in a place called Be Present Wellness. Be Present
tell
Wellness.
Me about that. Yeah.
It's a wellness center.
Like
it's a wellness center. If we're going to be inside, this is the sort of place you want to be inside at.
All right. right, sounds good. Maybe we'll do our next episode.
I would
then.
love if we could do that. That'd be amazing. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. All right, line it up.
All right, my friend.
All right, from one mystic to another, bruh. Salute.
Salute.